Hello, everyone. Welcome to Writing Quest. My name is Brendan Pugh, and in today's episode, we have Brina Williamson with us, and we're going to talk to her about her story and her writing process. And how are you doing?
I'm doing good.
Awesome. Why don't you just give us a quick little bit about your background? How'd you get into writing? Um, was it something that you did from a young age? Did you get into it when you're a little older? How'd that go for you?
Um, well, I think I was always into art as a kid, and so it was kind of like I kind of create characters and worlds and stuff with my art, and then I just kind of wanted to create stories for them too. So it kind of started as a young age of being an artist and being into art, and then just kind of building off from there. So I can't think of like a specific thing that kicked it off. It just sort of slowly developed
Yeah. Well,
an
and I read
interest
that
in that.
in your bio and stuff, and you've posted quite a bit on like X about art and stuff. So
Hmm.
you were an artist first then before
Hmm. Yeah,
jumping into writing?
yeah.
Yeah,
So I always like to have like illustrations in my books and stuff like that to, I don't
yeah,
know. They always have to have art in them or they just don't feel complete.
yeah. No, I get it. Well, and that's all the really great fantasy books that I love all have maps and all that
Yeah,
kind of
yeah.
fun stuff. I love illustrated editions. I always I have all the Harry Potter illustrated and like
Oh yeah, yeah.
anything illustrated. I love the that version.
I think it adds something. I remember reading like books when I was younger and it was always sort of exciting to come across an illustration. So
Mhm.
it just, I don't know, it makes it more fun.
Yeah. Yeah, there's so some of the illustrated editions of books I've gotten recently are like kind of fully illustrated, so they have a
Mm,
ton of artwork in them, which is really
yeah.
cool. But I have this one version of The Hobbit that's like an illustrated edition, but it has a really it doesn't have a lot in it. It's just like you kind of turn the pages and occasionally you come across like one character
Yeah.
will be drawn or something. And that one I find that one kind of funner to read almost.
Well, because it's still mostly about the writing and the story, but it's just sort of this little gem that you've come across every once in a while. So
Yeah.
it feels it's more unexpected and makes it more fun.
Yeah.
I still like the ones that have it like as a chapter. Every chapter there's something. Like
Yeah.
with my first book, I did them sort of scattered, but with this next one, I'm hoping to do almost every chapter if I can.
Yeah.
So,
That's really cool. Is there a specific book series, or something that really inspired you to like, hey, I think I have a story that I could write? Is there anything like that?
I don't know that there's a specific one. Um, I got into like I've written a couple of mysteries, and that I mostly got into because of Agatha Christie, which I have a whole shelf back there of. So yeah, I read a lot of Agatha Christie and just sort of I don't know, I loved the plotting of mysteries and stuff. So I've written a couple mysteries and I don't know if all my stories will always have a bit of a mystery element, but I think it's a fun place to start because mysteries are very plot heavy. And so you have
Hmm.
to get the plot just right if you're going to write one.
Yeah.
So,
Do you? So maybe we follow that a little bit with the writing mysteries. How do you? Because I've not actually talked to anyone about that yet. How do you
yeah.
start a mystery? So like, do you start with like this is the
Um
solving of the crime and then move backwards,
yeah, I
or?
kind of usually start with I have to know what the crime is.
Hmm.
So it's kind of you plot it out almost from the um, killer or the villain's perspective. What did they do? How did they think they were going to get away with it? And you sort of try and plan the perfect crime, and then you have to leave little places where they messed up for clues to put into the mystery. And so, yeah, it's kind of like you have to, or at least I have to know my ending. I have to know how it ends and what the crime is and stuff. And then you want, okay, so how does this crime when the clues are left, when it's discovered, what's the sort of hook that
Hmm.
makes it an intriguing puzzle to start from?
Yeah.
And then you sort of solve your puzzle to your ending.
Yeah,
So
that's cool. It seems to me like, and I've not written a mystery, so this is just total conjecture on my part.
I'm not an
Um,
expert either, but I
it,
like writing them. They're fun.
yeah, it seems like you could really get lost in like all of the different variability and possibilities of like
Mm.
you know, I have this ending, this happened, and then it just kind of keeps spidering out from there of how you
Right.
got there. Do you ever find like you're like maybe like there's too many ideas, or is it pretty easy to follow?
Like too many ideas for clues and red herrings and that kind of
Yeah,
thing?
yeah.
Um, yeah, there could be. I feel like if I have too many of them, it's going to feel contrived because you
Mhm.
only want like a few clues that actually mean something, and then most of it is just sort of suspicious people and suspicious stuff.
Mhm.
Um, I don't know that I've ever had that problem of it being too complicated. I mean, I've only written sort of short mysteries, but usually it's pretty easy to go, okay, this is the one clue that would be an interesting hook or an interesting, for the story, whereas it's easy to just have, oh, somebody overheard something, or those kinds of clues aren't as fun to play with. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, I mean, that I guess it is a risk to be overwhelmed with ideas, but you kind of just have to look at each possible and figure out what the best one is and narrow it down to the best few.
Yeah. I suppose that's not too different than just normal
Yeah, it's very
writing of
similar to plotting
yeah.
out anything else. I think it's fun to, because I started with mysteries, it's fun to sort of start with them as your base for how to plot stories because they have a very specific way that you have to do them right or they don't work. It's like easy to have a plot hole in a mystery. So you have
Mhm.
to get good at plugging up holes. But yeah, I think it's a good practice in
Yeah.
a way.
And getting really good at asking questions. Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, that's cool. So mysteries, and then I see you've also done a lot of kind of short stories and some novellas. So
Mhm.
is there maybe plotting short stories? How do you go about something like that as opposed to a mystery?
Um I actually, at this point, I kind of struggle with short stories because all of my ideas become novels. But I would say just you have to keep it really simple. You
Hmm.
have to sort of have your beginning, have your ending, and then have maybe a couple events in the middle, and that's it. You can't have much else because it's going to become way too big really fast if you have too much going on. So it's
Yeah,
kind of like keep it to one scene or one event or something simple.
yeah. I just think of them like it's like a chapter in a book. Like if you
Yeah,
were to
kind
read
of,
a
but
book,
it
you're
has
like,
to have like a satisfying ending.
right.
So,
Yeah, that's really cool. So we've been kind of talking about it, but maybe to be a little more direct about the question too, your writing process. So are you definitely probably with mysteries a little more of a plotter?
I'm kind of like right in the middle
Hmm.
between pantsing and plotting. I'm becoming more of a plotter because I've sort of winged it in the past and it takes way longer to sort out everything if you kind of go by the seat of your pants. So, yeah, I'm leaning towards plotting more, but I always have a rough outline when I start something.
Hmm.
I don't think I've maybe written some short stories that I didn't really know where I was going. I just kind of played with them.
Yeah,
But yeah, if you're going to do like a novel or a novella, you kind of have to plot it out. At least I do.
yeah, yeah. That's I the first manuscript I ever finished. Like I plotted it pretty good.
Hmm.
Um, but I also kind of just went for it. And then I remember getting to the end and like it was such a mess being super stressed out about it. Like
Yeah,
I was like the idea of
that
having
was
to
my
go,
first novel. Same
yeah.
thing.
It's like I haven't even went back to like I have it. It's on my shelf back here and I just
Yeah,
can't like it's stressful to think about like going back and trying to
yeah.
sort through it all.
For my first novel, I think the way I cleaned up the ending was just to sort of go back to the beginning and sort of find the places that were leading to the tangle at the end. Like, okay, this needs to be addressed so that it doesn't come to the end and have a problem. And so it's sort of like detangling the whole thing as you work through it, and then you can write your ending. I had to rewrite my first, I don't know, two-thirds of my
Hmm.
novel, like I don't know how many times before I could finally write the ending.
Yeah.
So,
I think in that manuscript I haven't rewritten it, but I have gone back and kind of worked on just outlining it a little differently. And
Mhm.
there's basically only like there's definitely one scene that's never changed. And then there's maybe another one, but like everything else is just
Yeah.
constantly changed, you know?
I think you have to be able to do that, to be willing to just play with things and try new things and
Yeah.
change the whole idea to make it work.
Yeah.
So,
It's amazing how much you can change and it's still like the same
yeah.
core story.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It still has the same heart.
Yeah. Very cool. So, did you start when did you publish your first thing? And um what made you decide to go do to self-publish it versus something else?
Um, I cannot remember the date that I published my first thing. I was a teenager when I was writing it.
Mhm.
I know that, but I don't remember the exact date. I mean, um, but I think the reason I decided to go indie was just the creative freedom. Like,
Mhm.
a publisher isn't going to let a newbie author illustrate their book. They're not
Yeah.
going to give them that kind of it's going to be a lot more controlled, especially when you're an unknown and they don't trust that you can, you know, do it
Right.
perfectly. So, yeah, I think it was mostly just the creative freedom of I had stories that I wanted to tell and I didn't really want to mold them to be what somebody else wanted them to be. I wanted it to be
Yeah.
the story I had in mind originally. So,
I think that's what I've been hearing from most everyone is they just want to be in
yeah.
control of things and in control of the process too, like what you're saying, like they
Mhm.
wouldn't probably wouldn't let you illustrate your own book and you're like, I want to illustrate my own book. So, you know.
Well, most books, especially first ones, don't even have illustrations. So
Mhm.
it's like it has to be a special edition to get those at this
Yeah.
point. So
So, with the writing process, we know you plot a little, kind of pants a little. Do you have any
mix of both.
specific kind of routines that you go with? Like, is there like you have a spot in the house, specific?
Yeah, I mean, I have a desk that I do my art and writing. It's kind of half computer, half paper.
Hmm.
Um, I'm I work better at night. Like once the sun goes down, I just feel more creative, so I usually do that. Um, I like to have music in the theme of what I'm writing just to get my head in it. So
Hmm.
I listened to a lot of like Uncharted for my first novel.
Yeah,
So
music's really big. That's a big one for me. I have a specific album by
yeah.
Joe Blankenberg is
Oh yeah.
the artist, and I have this one album of his, and that's what I listen to when I write my current story because it
Yeah.
just like the moment I heard it, I was like, this sounds exactly like what I want it to sound like.
Do you ever write with like lyrics?
So I've tried that. So it gets distracting for me. So like the two things that get distracting for me is I can't listen to anything that's like from a movie soundtrack. So like listening to like
Mm,
the Lord of the Rings soundtrack or Harry Potter. So like I couldn't
yeah.
listen to that because it just makes me go like into that
You think of the
story.
scenes from the movie. Yeah.
Yeah. And then I can't yeah, like any lyrics just kind of throw me off. It just distracts me because I'm a musician originally, and
Oh
so
yeah.
I'm a big music guy. And so when I start listening to lyrics, I want to like listen to the lyrics, you know? So that's kind of it just gets too distracting
There's a
for me.
few songs I've been able to listen to with lyrics that I can still write to them, but it's like it's not most songs. Like
Yeah.
sometimes I can, sometimes I can't. It just depends on the music.
Yeah.
When I was writing my mysteries, because they're all kind of 40s setting, I listen to a lot of like 40s music, and those usually have lyrics. So, but I don't know, it kind of almost becomes another instrument at a
Hmm.
certain point, especially if it's music you've heard a lot. At
Yeah.
least for me, it's yeah.
Yeah. Well, so like I'm a big Blink 182 fan, so you can tell from my shirt. And so that's like the stuff I would normally listen to just as music. And so
Mhm.
it's not really very conducive for writing a novel.
Yeah.
Yeah. So do you what are some of the like especially being self-published. What are some challenges you face with that? Is there, how do you fight through things like distraction, staying focused, getting into that kind of
So
stuff?
easily distracted.
Aren't we all?
So I think it might be an artist creative thing to be easily distracted. I mean, I think with indie publishing, it's probably primarily the getting seen, advertising,
Mhm.
marketing, that kind of thing. Still haven't cracked that one.
I don't know if
But
anyone has.
I feel like I've seen people who have, but it sounds like a full-time job, and I'm just like, how do you have time to write
Yeah.
and doing all that? So that's probably the biggest struggle I have. Yeah, consistency. Like, I'm not one of those people that can write every single day. I
Hmm.
get creative burnout, so I have to switch to something else. Usually I'll toggle between like writing and art.
Hmm.
So it's different creative outlets. So my writer brain can recharge while I'm doing art. So,
Yeah. Yeah, I like that. I think you always hear, if you just like Google writing advice,
mhm.
probably the number one thing you see is write every day. And I think that it's mostly good advice, but I don't think it works for everyone. And I when I first
Yeah,
started writing, I heard that and I was like, I'm gonna write every day, and I went into it and did the whole thing, and then I like that just doesn't really work with life a lot of the time,
yeah, yeah.
you know?
Well, also just like when I've tried to, if I have an art project that has a deadline and I have to work on it every single day, the I can see my art taking a toll. Like it doesn't
Mm,
come out as good.
yeah.
Like every day it's getting a little bit worse and I need to take breaks because it's yeah. And I think I can definitely see that with my writing too. If I try to write every single day, it's not going to be as good and then it's just more cleanup later.
Hmm.
So,
Yeah, definitely. And even time, like I find that I do better with short little
yeah,
um 15 to 45-minute spurts. And if
spurts,
I
yeah.
start getting
Yes.
like past an hour, I'm just like forcing myself to, and then it just starts turning to crap and it's no
I
good.
think I take a little while to get into it, so I'm more like an hour window.
Hmm.
But yeah, it's like it takes a little while to get my feet, but
Yeah. Yeah.
then I
No,
get
it's,
into it
I
and everything
just
goes
like,
great.
because I hear, I just like hearing that it kind of, there's the conventional wisdom out there. And then
Yeah,
most people are like, that doesn't really work in the real world.
yeah. The people
Yeah.
who actually are doing the writing are kind of like,
Yeah.
sure about
I'm the
that one.
same too. I have other creative interests too. So I get kind of bored with one type and then I move
Yeah,
over. My wife calls it creative ADD. That's, yeah,
I definitely think I have that.
yeah. So so when you do sit down to write, do you have any kind of methods for keeping yourself on track with the story to like remind yourself of where you were to like
Um, I'll often, after doing a writing session, I'll often sort of bullet point like these are the next things that I want to happen in the next scene, just to
Mhm,
sort of, you know, I'm tired, I'm not up to writing actual prose, but I know what needs to happen next, and so it helps me pick up when I get back into it because I just read my bullet points and
mhm.
know what the next scene consists of. That's
Yeah.
helped. I don't always do that, but that definitely helps me get into it a lot faster.
Mhm,
Um trying to think. I've known people who they'll like read their last chapter, their last scene to
mhm.
orient themselves. I don't think I've ever really done that. I might read like a couple paragraphs to see where I was, but I
I
can
don't
usually kind of remember what's happened
I don't know if I
and
generally have the time to do that. Like,
like read the whole chapter. Yeah,
yeah, like I'm
that's
gonna go
I'm
read the
I'd
whole
take
thing. I'm
most
like,
of my
no.
writing time reading if I did that.
Yeah, exactly. Because that's, I always end up, I only maybe have like a half an hour. I'm
Yeah,
gonna squeeze it in real quick at one time, and then I'm like, I can't read what I had before. Yeah.
but
Do you? Let me think. Do you? So, like, I've read this about Brandon Sanderson, where
mhm.
he will. like write a whole character's story. Like he'll write that whole point of view and then he'll go to the
Mm.
next point of view and write that.
Oh, for, like,
And then
multiple plots.
yeah, and then
Yeah.
he'll like put it all together later.
Mhm.
Do you like write more linearly? Do you have something like that where you do a different process
Um,
or
most of the stuff I've written so far hasn't really had the interwoven plot lines quite like that. So, the book that I am currently working on just finished writing the whole thing, it's being edited. Um, that one has, like, 2 threads to it, and I just wrote it as the scenes happened. I didn't, like, write one and then write the other.
Mhm,
So but I can imagine that would be helpful if you're doing really complex plots, especially if they're not too interconnected,
mhm,
because then, yeah, if it's interconnected, I feel like I would have to write them back and forth to make sure things aligned.
yeah, or
Um,
maybe it's like if they're interconnected but like on a bigger scale,
mhm.
then maybe it'd be fine to write them without going back and forth. But if they're
I
like
mean, maybe
scene
if
by
you had plotted
scene,
it out ahead of time,
yeah.
then you can write one and write the other. I'm working on a kind of novella that's dual perspectives, and each chapter it switches.
Mhm,
And at first, I was having trouble toggling because they're two distinct voices.
mhm,
Um, but I very quickly realized I couldn't um, write one and then write the other because it's like directly interconnected. It's like an event happens and you get both their perspectives back and forth.
mhm,
So yeah, that it's hard to toggle the voice back and forth like that, but certain stories I think you kind of have to. And then
mhm.
you can just go through and once you've written it, go through the, one side and make sure the voice is consistent and then go through the other and make sure it's because I mean, you can fix that stuff in editing a lot of the time. So
Yeah. Do you find it hard to create unique character voices? Or is that come pretty easy to you? Or
I don't think so. I don't yeah, I don't usually have trouble with that. There was a couple of times where I had to sort of shift dialogue to different characters in my first novel where it's like, okay, that character wouldn't necessarily know that information. This other person would have to say it. And then I'd have to rewrite the whole like line to make it in
Mhm,
their voice. But so there was a little bit of getting the voices confused because I was switching stuff around in edits. But yeah, no, not usually.
mhm.
Um, Sometimes I'll struggle with it a bit when I'm sort of first writing the first draft because you're kind of getting to know the characters and you're getting to know their voices. But once you've written the whole thing, you know them by the end, and then you can go and clean it up in edits.
Yeah. I find that
Make
when
sure
I
everything's
write like a
consistent.
first draft of something, it's like I kind of fall more into like cliche stuff. So like if I'm writing like something with like elves and dwarves and
Mhm.
humans, it's like the dwarves sound like I don't
Scotsman.
know. Yeah, like how you'd imagine they would. And elves sound like Tolkien elves and
Yeah,
then you kind of like as you go through it again, I'm like, okay, this can't sound exactly like, this. But it's a good fallback when you're still kind of figuring out
yeah.
what it is and all that stuff.
I've done a little bit of because a lot of people will do complex character studies. Like they'll do a chart for every character, and sometimes I'll just do the character and then sort of like 3 or 4 words that describe their personality as a sort of reminder of what they're like.
Hmm.
And so, and, I mean, you can easily create a really kind of cliche character doing that, but it's just sort of a thing to go back to remind you that these are some of their base traits
Yeah.
that that helps affect how they talk and carry themselves and do things. I mean, you
So do you
obviously want to
find
know more than that, but it's just sort of a little reminder
yeah.
thing
So
to
do you
fall
find
back
if
on.
you get too in depth on a character study that it limits you, or like do you like to have a little
Um,
freedom with it, or do you want to know exactly who that character is?
I usually like to sort of learn who the character is while writing the first draft, and
Hmm.
then I'll write a bunch of what I've learned down in a chart so that I can reference it during editing.
Yeah.
Because if I a lot of the time I've tried doing more in-depth characters before writing, and then it's sort of I have to change things because the character isn't serving the story the way I need them to, and a
Hmm.
bunch of stuff that I already decided has to change for the story, and so they become slightly different than I anticipated them being.
Yeah.
So,
I have some like I generally what I'll do now, what I've been doing is I have some ideas of who the character might be, but I definitely know what they have to be in the story. And
mhm,
so a lot of times if I have that in mind, I can kind of eventually their personality starts to fit with what that needs to be. So it's kind of
mhm,
like knowing the ending of the book. It's like if you know
yeah,
the beginning and the end, you can kind of figure out the middle. It's kind of like that, but just for the characters themselves.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's I think it's good to have sort of a baseline, but be willing to change it
Hmm.
as needed. So,
Yeah, because stories are evolving all the time, and
yeah.
um, you never. It's amazing how I feel like writing is the really the only. Maybe art's the same as this, so you can maybe tell me. But writing
Mm,
is very like the story kind of tells you what it is. Like you'll be writing something,
mm,
and the characters will be like, all of a sudden you'll write something, you'll be like, I didn't know that character was going to do that. So it kind of
yeah,
informs you in a way.
yeah. Yeah, I think I've had similar experiences with art where I have an idea and then I sort of am playing with colors and different things and go, you know what, this is better. I like this, lighting choice or setting or whatever better. So
Hmm.
yeah, it can I think with art and probably similar with writing, um, it's good to have sort of your base structure and know what you're doing, but then all the details you can kind of play with.
Yeah. So do you generally do you have like a kind of plot structure that you like to start with? Like do you have like the three act or this whatever it is, and then you
Um,
or do you just kind of go with whatever you feel like for the story?
I mean, I think it totally depends on what you're writing. I've tried different structures that I've found, and I don't know. I think because for my first novel, I didn't follow a structure at all, but it just sort of instinctively, because I've read enough and I've watched enough movies, it kind of instinctively fell into the sort of standard structures.
Hmm.
So I don't know. I think if you read and look at that stuff enough, it just sort of seeps in and you instinctively do it. Or at
Yeah.
least, yeah, it's,
Yeah, that's I like I generally start with like the 3x story structure just because it's fairly
yeah.
simple and it kind of makes it just good sense of like, hey, this is how a story should go.
Hmm.
But I change it a lot eventually. Like it doesn't stay that way for sure.
Yeah. Well, I feel like you don't want to be boxed in by that
Right.
sort of stuff because I can't imagine I can't I often will think about my writing and art and I'll see a lot of the rules for writing
Hmm.
and I go if art had that number of rules like you would just be drawing the same thing over and over again. We wouldn't have all the different styles and it wouldn't be as interesting. It would just be
Hmm.
sort of the same thing. So I don't know. I don't love a lot of the set rules and structures and all that sort of stuff with writing because it feels like an art form to me because I started as an artist. And
Hmm.
so it feels like you're boxing it in too much and you get less creative freedom to tell different unique stories if you're limiting yourself like that. I don't think it's bad to have just sort of a base structure, but you want to be free to try new things and
Yeah, it's kind of like learning the rules to break the rules kind of a thing.
yeah.
Yeah. Because like I remember, when I first started writing, I had no idea what I was doing. I just started writing stuff. And then I kept finding myself in to issues where I'm like, I don't know how to fix this. Like I don't know how to get this from A to B.
Yeah.
Like I went from A to T and now I don't know how to get, back or figure it out. So then it was kind of I went into this mode of learning a lot about the rules,
Hmm.
reading a lot of books about structure, reading a lot of books
Mm.
about all that. And then I again started doing what you're saying, which was feeling like I'm like really boxed into this whole
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
And so now it's now breaking out of that and,
Yeah.
you know,
It's
yeah,
okay. It's good to learn the rules, but don't be restricted by them.
yeah,
So
yeah, I like that. So, inspiration, where do you find it? Where does your inspiration come for your stories? Do they just appear in your dreams? Do you think
I
through
I
them?
I have had quite a few dreams. Yes, my first mystery was a dream, actually.
That's awesome.
It was just the detective laying everything out of what the crime was and how he solved it and blah blah blah.
Mhm,
So yeah, that was my first mystery. But yeah, I just kind of get inspiration from anything. I'll
mhm.
see someone walking down the street and an idea will pop into my head. I'll, watch a movie and one little scene or one little line in it sparks an entirely unrelated idea. So yeah, I don't know. I can't not get ideas.
Yeah.
Can't
That's
not
how I am too.
get inspired. I can't even count the number of notes I've made on possible stories that I want to write at some point.
Mhm.
So
Yeah, that's mine came from the story that I'm working on now that I've been working on forever is a series, but the idea came for I was working in a factory and
mhm.
I was just doing like assembly line, like nothing very menial, no like brain
Yeah, your
power
brain
required
was free
work.
to create.
Yep. And then my brain all of a sudden was like, what if this and this and that, and then it all just kind of came
Yeah.
together. Yeah.
Yeah, I
So
think
do you,
I think that's why people get ideas the most when they're like doing dishes or house chores or showering or something because
mhm.
your brain is free to think and
Oh,
create.
I've definitely done the whole like doing the dishes and then oh crap, I gotta write this down. And then I have, like your hands are all wet and you're
Dirty
trying to
hands.
find a,
I think I read something
pen.
that Agatha Christie, that's how she plotted her stuff. She just did dishes and stuff like that.
Yeah,
It's where she
that's
got all her
awesome.
best ideas.
Yeah. And I saw in part of your bio too, I was just reading a lot of stuff where you like the kind of 1920s, 1940s. Is that
Yeah.
any reason for that or you just like it?
Not really. I don't know. I watched a lot of like old movies as a kid,
Hmm.
so I just kind of like the vintage vibe. And I'll come up with an idea and then it's kind of like, oh, that would be more fun in the 50s or that would be more fun, you know, in an old timey setting or something. So
Yeah. That's a cool
it
writing
always just kind of gets
exercise.
that flair. But
Yeah. It was a much more idyllic time, that's for sure. Yeah, that's a
yeah,
cool writing exercise though to take like some idea you have and then be like, what would it be
yeah,
like if it was in
fantasy
the
in the 20s.
Mhm. Yeah, that'd be cool. There was a
Yeah.
Netflix movie a few years ago. It was a Will Smith movie that it wasn't very good, I don't think. But it
Oh,
was like a
the modern day fantasy one?
yeah, where it was like elves and
What's that
orcs
one called?
yeah, I don't remember what it was called. I remember watching it thinking like it wasn't terrible. It was a cool idea, but they didn't really like pull
Yeah,
it off. Um,
yeah,
but I don't think a
that's
lot of
always a
people
shame.
it is. Yeah, it was definitely I remember watching it just being like, this is a really great idea. They didn't quite do it, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's cool. So, self-published, everything you've done
Mhm.
is self-published. And what kind of advice would you have for writers who are first off just writing? Maybe they're first getting into writing or they're coming up with their first ideas, but then also maybe even transitioning to like maybe they're gonna go publish. Like, what kind of advice would you have around those things?
Like self-publishing?
Yeah.
Ah, I don't know that I have a whole lot of self-publishing advice. Um, Trying to think.
Or maybe just even for someone who is starting out writing and they're just getting into it and they're not sure like where to start or, you know.
Um, I think I can't remember who said it, but there was a writer that was saying, sort of starting small, like, because I started with shorter things, and
Mhm.
now at this point I can't not write novels most of the time. Um, so just starting with something small is less daunting. I've known a lot of writers who they try to dive into a novel or a 3-book series or something like that and never finish it because it's just too much.
Yeah.
So Yeah, I would say if you're just starting out, start with like short stories or novellas or something like that. Just to like a novella, I feel like is a really good place to start because you can do a proper plot
Hmm.
with the beginning, middle, end, and twists, but it has to be simple and it can't have too much going on. So it's like a practice novel almost.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
short stories are almost I mean, you kind of have that structure, beginning, middle, end,
Yeah.
but
Well, it
kind of
also just
not.
builds the habit of getting things finished and knowing
Yeah.
that you can finish things and you're you have to write like tight, punchy sentences and stuff. You have to keep it tight because you can't let it get too long. So
Hmm.
I think it finesses your writing in that way too, because you
Yeah.
can't meander. You have to,
Helps you reduce the
yeah.
words and
Well,
yeah.
but just also make every word count
Yeah.
because it's not really fun writing something where you can tell they were just kind of trying to pad it.
Yeah. Yeah.
You want everything to be necessary to the story.
Hmm.
So,
So I find when I write, I'm kind of a serial underwriter. So like
mm,
I never write. I'll write through a scene and then I'll feel like I wrote so much, and then I maybe only wrote 1,000 words or something, and then
I
or then I
started as an underwriter. I could
yeah.
only do like short stories.
So
And
then did you go
then,
back and like fill it in again? Like is that like or how did
um,
you do that?
no, I usually try and let the story just be as long as it needs to be.
Hmm.
But my first novel was supposed to be like a short story or novella. And then it ended up not from me trying to pad it, just me having too much that I wanted to fit in there.
Hmm.
It ended up being like 90,000 words or something. So, and then this latest novel, which is a prequel to the first one, um, that one's like 100,000. So, and that one was supposed to be shorter than the first because it was just sort of
Right.
supposed to be a small prequel. But so I think, yeah, I don't know. It's with practice, I think you can get out of the underwriting
Hmm.
with just the more you write, the more things you have to say.
Yeah.
And so then it just sort of naturally happens rather than trying to make it bigger than it was meant to be.
Right. Or even like one of the things, I get through a scene and I like got all the story beats in there, but then I
Mhm.
realized like I didn't really describe anything. So
Right.
like
Yeah.
nobody knows what anything looks like, or I didn't describe this character, or I didn't put in like this section of dialogue that explains
I
something.
feel like I always do that on my first drafts. People, I don't describe what people look like. I don't describe the scene very well. I have to like go back and add all that stuff.
Yeah. I sometimes I get through a scene and then I'm like, I don't even know if I know what this character totally looks like. Yeah, that's funny. Um, so maybe here's a question for you. Any thoughts on the current publishing industry? Any thoughts on trends that are going on, like books that you like, books that you don't like?
I don't really follow trends.
Yeah.
Most of what I read is kind of more classic stuff. I don't read a ton of modern fiction.
Hmm.
So I don't, I'd have to like hear about a specific trend to comment on it, but I don't really follow what the current trends are in fiction. I
Yeah.
probably should, but
Well, I think
just kind of write what I like.
yeah, which I think, speaks to wanting to have self-published is,
Yeah.
not sticking to, you're not trying to fit into any box that they're trying to create or whatever.
Well, I feel like it's like, I feel like I enjoy things when the writer had a passion for that genre or that story rather than just trying to, fill a market,
Hmm.
desire or what people are looking for, because then it just becomes kind of copycatting or, you know, just it feels a bit derivative.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
not
Or
always, but, you know.
well, it's kind of like movies. It's like it's been superhero movies forever, and everyone just wants to make a superhero movie, and then we're all
Yeah.
kind of like, I mean, superhero movies are pretty good, but we could
We
do
like other
something different.
things too.
Yeah, yeah. Other things
Well,
are
I mean,
great.
like when I think of books and movies that people remember and they like have made a lasting mark, it wasn't I don't think any of them were really what the trend was. I mean, pulp adventure was kind of dying out when they made Indiana Jones.
Hmm.
And, you know, I don't I don't think epic fantasies were really a thing when they made Lord of the Rings and like there's most of that stuff it's kind of it was there was nothing else like it.
Yeah.
And so that's why everyone really liked it because it was new and it was exciting. Whereas,
Y-
you know, Hunger Games was a sort of YA dystopian thing, but then a bunch of dystopians sort of spawned off of that.
mhm.
And but everyone remembers Hunger Games.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Harry Potter's a great example of that too, I think,
yeah,
where it just like
it
hits
wasn't it
something
wasn't
that,
what was popular. It made what was popular.
yeah. It kind of goes back to that breaking the rules thing of like,
Yeah,
if if you're doing the thing that it is popular, you're already behind, you know?
yeah.
Like,
I
yeah.
mean, I understand publishers doing it because it's a safe bet. It's like that
Hmm.
was successful and people are craving more because there was only one of them. So it's kind of like the first few that come off of that can be successful or be done well. Um, but once you've had a few, it's kind of like, okay, next thing.
Yeah.
It's getting a bit old.
Yeah.
So
It's kind of like, westerns too. Like they had a whole big heyday and then
yeah,
they kind of died out. And, but now if anyone like makes a western, it's like, oh, this is really good, because you don't get a
yeah.
lot of westerns
I
anymore.
think most things they kind of go in waves. It's like it peaks and then it kind of dies out and then it comes back again.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. So you've mentioned a couple times you're working on a few projects.
Mhm.
So what are you working on right now? And then maybe we can get
Um,
into a little bit of what you have done. But what are you working on right now?
okay. So what I'm working on right now is I have the book here, if that helps. So I did my pulp adventure, and then this is not the finished copy. It's just sort of a rough print of the prequel that I'm working on. So I'm that one is done. It's just kind of being edited, and I'm working on the illustrations. But I'm also working with another company, Victim Digital, I think it's called,
Hmm.
to do a sort of audio drama of the first book.
Oh, that's
So
cool.
I think that's the pilot's coming out in October.
Hmm.
So yeah, so I'm working with them to sort of like, we mostly got the script down. It's pretty much recorded. I'm just sort of working back and forth. I think it's getting scored now. So it's going to have a soundtrack and all that sort of fun stuff.
Oh, that's super
Um,
cool.
but yeah, so I'm just working on the prequel and then I'm plotting out the third book in the series. I have a couple more for that series.
Yeah.
Um, and then I'm just doing sort of a bunch of little kind of spooky short stories that I'm going to put in a short story collection one October, one of these days.
Yeah, that's cool.
Um,
For getting the audio drama thing produced,
mhm.
are you doing like, are you kind of rewriting a script for it, or are they doing it kind of verbatim?
They're pretty much just taking all the dialogue verbatim from the book
Hmm.
and then just sort of adding, because it's just audio, so you have to add in dialogue to orient people what's going on and where things
Right.
are and stuff. So it's slightly tweaked dialogue, but most of it's the same. Like all the interactions are going to be the same. So that's been really fun to like hear. It was kind of one of those surreal. I never thought I'd say the actress playing my character.
Right.
So that's been fun. Um, but yeah, we're doing a pilot in October. I don't know when the Kickstarter is launching to like fund the rest of the series because it's going to be episodic, sort of couple
Oh,
chapters
that's
per
really cool.
episode to do the whole book. But yeah, so there'll be a Kickstarter at some point that I'll be announcing. But
Yeah, that's really
yeah,
awesome.
so that's
That's very
fun.
cool.
I don't have to do a whole lot of work on that. They're doing most of it, but
Yeah, just
it's
kind of
cool to see it
send
come
it off
together.
to them and
Yeah,
just approve it as they send it back to you,
yeah,
kind of a thing.
yeah.
Yeah. So
So I'm
is
just
your
focusing on the other books in the series.
yeah, and are the books in that series, are they kind of more, is it kind of one whole story, or are they kind of more like episodic
There's sort of an
mysteries?
interconnected thread, but they're
Hmm.
sort of standalone.
Yeah,
So
kind of like a like a cop procedural. Like there's
Yeah.
the bad guy of the week, but there's also those
It's
like,
kinda like an Indiana Jones thing. It's like you can
yeah,
watch them in whatever order, but better to watch them in order.
yeah,
So,
that's really cool. Man, I'm really intrigued about the audio drama. You'll have to let me know when that happens. That sounds really
yeah,
cool.
I'll try to keep people posted. I don't get, like, consistent feedback. I'll just get little, like, audio files. "What do you think of this?"
Hmm.
So but it's not like stuff I can announce per se. It's
Yeah,
sort of, like, just fun to see how it's going.
yeah, that's very cool. Well, we're coming up here on about 50 minutes or so. So to wrap things up, do you have any kind of final advice? If you were to tell anyone anything, do you have any final
Final,
words?
like, writing advice?
Yeah, writing advice,
I don't
anything
know.
like
Write
that.
what you're passionate about because it's gonna have a lot more heart in it if you actually care rather than just, you know, what you think people will like.
Yeah,
But
love it. Awesome. Well, it's been great talking to you. Where can we find
yeah.
you? Where can we find all this stuff, your
Um
links, all that?
so I'm on Twitter and Instagram or X and Instagram. But I have like links in my bios with all my other stuff. I have like a Redbubble shop with art if anyone wants to look at art and stuff. Yeah, mostly just Twitter and Instagram is where I am. It's Brina Williamson. I think Instagram has like a little underscore between, but just yeah, Brina Williamson.
Cool. We'll put that in the description and everything too,
Okay,
so people can click on all that stuff, and we'll put links to the books and everything. It's been great talking
sounds
to you,
good. Yeah,
and thanks for being on the show. And
thanks
thanks,
for having
everyone.
me.
Yeah, this has been Writing Quest, and we'll see you next time.